Exactly.
And of course, standing to my right, you know him, you love him, you can't live him without him. Ladies and gentlemen, if science ever stops getting funny, this man is going to throw it to the ground and single-handedly pump the life of comedy back into it. Here he is, the one, the only, the science comedian, Brian Malow.
I didn't know we were using scripted intros. Okay, so what this session is, this is not, I don't want to disappoint anyone. I was saying we're not primarily here to make you laugh. We want this to be a conversation. We don't really want to dominate it. We want dialogue. We want this to be unconferencey. So please participate. But what we wanted to look at were the uses and abuses of humor in science communication. And that's can be taken very broadly there. We could, I think there's a lot to... Is that a use or an abuse? Possibly both at the same time. So one of the reasons this is interesting to me is that when I started out, I've been doing stand-up for a long time, way before I called it science comedy, and I have only an obligation to make people laugh. I never had an obligation, like science communicators, to communicate anything. No pressure to communicate anything at all. I just have pressure to make people laugh. As I started calling myself a science comedian, there was an expectation and then an interest in my part on doing more, on actually communicating something. So somewhere along there, there's this spectrum where I need to make people laugh, but I really want to, because I love science and I find it endlessly fascinating, I also want to impart some of that. Sometimes it's just the passion, and sometimes, bring some humor to it, make people laugh. Maybe they'll like it more than they already do, or more than they don't. Did that make any sense at all? So, and one of the reasons we're doing this together is he's incredibly funny. Yes, and even your intro to a really good example of science humor. I picked up a book called Anti-Gravity. It's Steve Mirsky, who has this wonderful long-running column in the back pages of Scientific American that's a science humor column. And his book has about 100 of his monthly columns, and they're very funny. And sometimes they're funny just because of the content. He almost doesn't have to do anything with it because it's about Diane Kelly's research about armadillo penises. And so it's like it writes itself. And so other times he's the one bringing the funny to it. And so, do you want anything more in terms of introductory remarks? You want to jump in here? All right, so we're done now. It's on you. So, I like your framework. We should get that in there.
I will, thank you. And by the way, really appreciate getting the opportunity to talk about science humor and unconference, because we recognize that's an opportunity to be unfunny, and we will run with that very much. Let me give you an example of, I suppose this could count as a sort of a pitfall of science humor from years ago. About 20 years ago, I was writing a news story for Scientific American that was about genetic mechanisms that prevent successful hybridization between animal species, about why it is that different types of animals can't breed together. And it was full of, as you might imagine, some fairly dry molecular biology detail. And so I decided, with my lead of that, I would try to punch it up a little bit. And so I started with a joke. And the joke was, what do you get if you cross a parrot with an 800-pound gorilla? And the answer is, I don't know, but if it talks, you listen. Thank you. That's exactly the level of non-response it deserves. The point is, so I happened to be taking, I sort of wrote this up in a draft, and I happened to send some portions of the story off to the scientist involved to see if I had actually described the science right. And I actually, by mistake, left that joke on at the beginning. And he got back to me and he said, listen, that joke, I don't think that's really going to work because, a parrot and a gorilla are just, they're just way too different. If I was you would never be able to get them to hybridize. I did some research for you, though, and I found a couple of animals who have the same number of chromosomes. Could you make the joke work with a cat and a vole? I am not kidding you. I'm not kidding you that actually happens. So the problem is that, so when you attempt at science humor, it depends a lot, not just on you and the quality of your jokes, but on the audiences you have in mind, and he was clearly the wrong audience for that joke.
Also, not really up on current genetic engineering techniques. No. If you can, breed a jellyfish with a plant, I think...
Yeah. So because, if there's one thing people love when it comes to comedy, it's nice academic discussions of it. I thought I would try, in the interest of getting discussion going on this, I would try to throw out sort of a kind of typology of three types of the points of, three ways of having humor in different kinds of science stories of whatever sort. So three, and each of them goes to, in a way, it's both the method and the end that people would have in mind. The first one is an example of when the humor is just purely, that's the end in itself. This would be a case of, just if you are a comedian, and you're just trying to, to make people laugh. And in that case, the science, it may be the content of what's in there, but it's kind of incidental to your overall goal of trying to make people laugh. And, it's the joke of that. Somebody who's very successful humorist, obviously, who does that sort of thing is Dave Barry. He wrote a sort of classic piece called Science, It's Just Not Fair, about science fairs years ago. And he was, wrote about this, and he had things like, ideally, when you're choosing a topic for your science fair, it should involve a minimum of property damage or death, which is why on the advice of the newspaper's legal counsel, we are not going to discuss some of our popular project topics from previous years, such as what is inside plumbing and flame-proofing your cat. Whatever topic you select, your project should be divided into three parts: the hypothesis, the part that goes after the hypothesis, and the conclusion. This should always be the same as the hypothesis. And he talks about the etymology of hypothesis, which comes the Greek word meaning word, and thesis meaning that I am looking up in the dictionary right now. So, those are examples of just sort of the science part is incidental to the rest of what's going on.
And I would say that applies to a lot of my stuff. Something as simple as I used to be an astronomer, but I got stuck on the day shift. Or I noticed a long time ago, whenever my mom would lose weight, my dad would gain weight. When my dad lost weight, my mom gained weight. It was like the conservation of mass within our family. And I had a theory that you never actually lose weight, you just give it to somebody else. Fat can be neither created nor destroyed. And in that case, though, there's nothing being taught there, although those jokes could be a starting out point to a topic. And I like, when I do the astronomers stuck on the day shift, very often with some crowds, I kind of got to make it clear, it's like, I know that there are some astronomers that work on the day shift. First of all, that there are solar astronomers and radio astronomers, but you could even go so far as to say most astronomers work on the day shift today because they work on telescopes that are on the other side of the world, everything's digital, and they keep the hours they prefer to keep during the daylight. So like a joke like that could be a starting out point for something, even if the joke itself is just
which kind of leads to the second type on this, which is where the humor, the jokes or whatever else are in a sense they are an ornament or an addition to the rest of the science writing. You're using it to help maybe to enliven the story, maybe to brighten it up, maybe bring some element of your own personality into it and help make it more distinctive. And this is most of what most of us would ever be trying to bring humor into our science writing. It's what we do most of the time, and it's everything from my joke about the parrot and the gorilla to the examples that you were giving, and it's a way of helping to bring something in. There is a third level, though, that it starts to blur into, which I think is really another really interesting level. It's the one where the humor and the science are genuinely so deeply intertwined you can't actually separate them out. Where it's, in a way, the humor is there partly because of your perception of the science or your persona as someone involved, even just as a narrator in the story, and how much that actually brings to it. And ideally, you're kind of bringing something deep and rich to that. There are a lot of different sorts of examples, one can conceivably use about something like that. Even something, this is the, very, very famous story, of course, of the honey badger. I actually have... Yes.
Whoa, watch out, said that bird. Ew, it's got a snake. Oh, it's chasing a jackal. Oh my gosh. Oh, the honey badgers are just crazy. The honey badgers been...
Yes, well, and so on. I mean, Randall, who did that, is he's a very nice guy, and it's very interesting that he in his desire to do that, he really did that because his father was actually somebody who was involved in making these kinds of wildlife movies, and he genuinely wanted to be able to do more of this. And so actually they're trying to like pitch TV series and things because he would actually be able to love this character of Randall and this sort of perspective on wildlife to be able to help to reinvigorate some of that model of wildlife documentary again. And there's another example, and this one, it's not filled with jokes as such, but there is a humor I think you'll perceive in the wonderful, wonderful concept of this. And it was from a television special called The Great Sperm Race. And it was about, I think it was one whole program, may have even been a short series, in which the point of it was illuminating the mysteries of what's involved in conception. Everything involved in how sperm unites with egg. And it found an absolutely wonderful, wonderful, wonderful way of being able to help to dramatize this. And again, I'm going to lose some because of the audio on this, but let's see what happens. I think you'll get the point of it very quickly.
Epic journey sperm undertake through the human body. And we're going to do it by scaling the whole thing up to human size.
It's like with that.
First time we'll be able to appreciate just what an extraordinary journey sperm takes.
I hadn't seen this.
It's one of nature's most spectacular stories, and it's the reason you're alive.
It is a brilliant, brilliant idea and a way of using the humor of that, and it absolutely works. And, it takes something, a lot of people would not decide, I think I'll sit down tonight on television and relax with a nice special about, conception. But this, you cannot stop watching this. So this sort of shows, this is a wonderful, payoff of how the humor weds itself to the concept, and you really get something that's so rich and rewarding that way.
And that reminds me, there's a video that demonstrates chemical bonds, and it's a scene, it's a dance party, basically, and it shows different partners dancing and breaking away from each other, and shows some same-sex partners, shows threesomes, and it's a really cool, similarly humorous video about chemical bonds.
So, this is sort of, some of our miscellaneous thoughts on this general topic. One thing we haven't gotten to yet, but I think in discussion this will probably come up, is what happens when science humor goes wrong, and not being funny is not the worst thing that can happen in those situations. But because it is an unconference, and we want you in on this, and we know some of you have a lot of experience with using humor in your own work, let's fan out through the crowd. Let's Phil Donahue our way through this.
Yes. I think we have a question.
I think probably.
A comment.
You stand here. I'll run here. Like a sperm, a gigantic sperm.
I actually have an excellent example of what can happen when your attempts at humor go terribly wrong.
You wasn't this, was it?
No.
Okay, go ahead.
So when I was in college, I was my newspaper's opinion editor, and one of the things we had in our student newspaper was a call-in thing where people could just leave, this is pre-Twitter, basically analog Twitter. And we would post, in the paper, some of the better comments from this. And at one point, somebody called in and left a message that was something like, "My TA Mary is so cute, she makes Punnett squares sexy." And I thought this was hilarious as an anthropology major, so I stuck it in there, only to find out that there was only exactly one TA named Mary in the entire anthropology department. And she was horribly offended, and then I had to go to sensitivity training.
Yeah, so again, sort of knowing your audience, knowing your subject matter, having a good feel for the room.
It certainly is risky, because it's unbelievable for just putting jokes online, the evilness of some comments I've gotten, where it's like, okay, you didn't find it funny, but you didn't really have to attack my personal life as you did.
I would like to suggest another category, maybe, satire. And, like The Onion or Jon Stewart or any of those things. The satire on science is actually, can be used to twist the knife against an opponent or in an educational purpose, but I think that that's sort of a distinct category.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good point. I was thinking of that sort of in that context of the last one because the humorous notion was wet in, but it's absolutely true. There was I actually had an example of what for me was, this is probably the single most successful thing I ever wrote. It was an editorial piece for Scientific American that we did in the April issue back in 2005. In which, it begins, there's no easy way to admit this. For years, helpful letter writers told us to stick to science. They pointed out that science and politics don't mix. They said we should be more balanced in our presentation of such issues as creationism, missile defense, and global warming. We resisted their advice and pretended not to be stung by the accusations the magazine should be renamed Unscientific American, or Scientific Un-American, or even Unscientific Un-American. But spring is in the air, and all of nature is turning over a new leaf, so there's no better time to say, you were right, and we were wrong. And I just, go on to talk about how foolish we were to be bowled over by the scientists with their, tens of thousands of published research papers and their mountains of evidence. And it worked precisely because it was just the humor made it possible to hold that up and be able to drive home a point that you couldn't just stand and rail at straightforwardly anymore.
Sometimes sarcasm can fail. I have a line in this video clip where I say that sometimes I think just the fact that so many people in the United States don't believe in evolution might be the strongest evidence that it really isn't occurring. So that got engaged in the comments by someone who apparently missed the fact that I'm a comedian on stage at a comedy club. And is really engages with that like it was not sarcasm. And totally this guy is really saying that it's not real. So there's always that risk.
I also think so. So my name's Dave Ing, and I do a little bit of science humor writing on the side for McSweeney's. And what I find great about humor generally is that not everybody is into science, but everybody likes a good chuckle. So especially from an educational front, it's actually really handy sometimes to intersperse humor where you just bring something up that can somehow tie the subject. Like I could be talking about stem cells, and I might bring up stem cell Barbie or something like that, which feels like real skin because it is real skin, or something like that, right? And or I might talk about genetics, and I might sort of use the angle of the Von Trapp children speaking to a geneticist, and you're kind of looking at the different genetic scenarios because Liesel's a brunette, but everyone else is a blonde. So what's up with that, right? And all of these other things. But I find it's just a really useful, especially if it's sort of a public talk. It's a really handy thing to use. And I just want to, the Science Scout stuff, I have an extra badge here talking about science humor. This is a badge called I Can Be a Prick When It Comes to Science badge. So if you want one, just come get one. So.
What
does it look like? Oh, there you go.
Oh, yeah, so it got pulled off because of sponsor concerns. So Karen just earlier said, I've got a whole bunch of these badges.
John, one thing I should say is maybe some of you came with expectations and an interest in certain things being discussed and questions or topics that you would hope would come up. Maybe you'd raise your hand and voice that and make him run around the room.
We're working for your science unconvention dollar. Go!
Well, one of the things I wanted to make clear that what makes humor work is that people have to get it. In other words, that it has to be about some sort of cultural reference that people get. Because there's always an in group and then there's an out group. You would hope the people in the room are all a part of the in group and you're talking about an out group that's not there. But being careful of whatever references you're using, like the Von Trapp children, that's funny because I watch Sound of Music. But if you didn't, you just kind of like, who the hell is Von Trapp? Who are these German kids? I don't get it. See, you didn't. See, and it makes something either not funny or you don't get it. And I think science jokes can fail because I think I'm hilarious. I think I'm effing hilarious. I should have been writing sketch comedy. A long time ago. But, my jokes fail on my friends because they're like, your jokes are just way too smart. I gotta understand too much detail to get your joke. But once they get it, they're like, oh, that was funny. And so I think that's the problem with some science jokes is that it can be too detailed. By the time you explain the concept, it's like, never mind, it was hilarious.
Right. And what chance does science have if we have to dumb down our science humor? Even.
Thank you.
Brian, you do videos for Time Magazine. So I mean, to that point, Time Magazine is as much of a broad swath through the American public as there could be. Do you have any sort of set of ground rules that you have in mind of like?
Here's one ground rule. Right after my first one got embedded in some blogs and got eviscerated, I started describing them as mildly humorous. That's one thing you can do is downplay, because low expectation is the key to happiness in life, right? And so it's like I found myself saying to people, I make these mildly humorous videos for Time. And so some of them are kind of straight, and then some of them, I don't ever use the most obscure stuff. Like if I'm playing a conference of scientists, I can play on that special knowledge and make a reference like they wanted me to be off the cuff, and I said, yeah, I'm so spontaneous, I have a negative delta G. That is, and you know what? That's only for chemists. That's really not for anyone else. And even half of them aren't sure they like it. But so you have to know your audience. And I would never make that obscure kind of stuff on those Time videos for the general audience. So just keep it. One of the videos was about Galileo. We celebrated the International Year of Astronomy in 2009, was it? And I started off by saying when you hear the word Galileo, most people think of the Queen song, and I have a little segment of Queen going Galileo, Galileo, or somebody dropping stuff off the Tower of Pisa, Leaning Tower of Pisa, and there's an image of me up high dropping stuff. So it's keeping it very general. Yeah.
Well, identify yourself too. Right?
Yeah, please identify yourself.
My name is Michael. Process question. A process could go either for the individual, it could be somebody writing an article and they want to be funnier, or it could be an organization who's doing outreach and people sit around and think, oh, let's make a viral video. Who wants to go make a viral video? And some things that I've seen about viral videos, like last year there was this who's a climate scientist, I think. I'm a climate scientist. It was this Australian outfit. But that came from their kind of steward show. It was a comedy show, and then they said, well, let's go get some scientists who can help us finish the joke. And so that's hard to replicate unless your starting point is with a team of comedy writers. So I'd be curious from the audience or from you, how do you get started being funnier?
Well, yeah, that is a tough one. I'd say
Drugs were very important for Saturday Night Live.
I like the way you didn't say, nothing personal there. That was Saturday Night Live. Those people used a lot of drugs. Obviously, I think with a lot of arts and talents, there's something innate. But I think there's a lot that can be learned. I think there's a lot that can be practiced. And there's certain sources, I think, that are easy sources to identify for humor. One, and sometimes when I give these workshops, I say, let's say you're using PowerPoint. You could get humor out of humorous imagery, even if the text of what you're saying isn't funny at all. In this one presentation where I'm talking about, maybe my text is supposed to be a little funny, but I'm talking about noble gases and helium being aloof and disinterested. We have some imagery that I'm lucky that my fiance is a graphic whiz and can help me with that. But we used football players stiff-arming each other, and they have HE helium symbols on them. And it's a nice visual, and it's kind of humorous. And even if the text of your presentation wasn't funny, you could do something with cute sort of metaphoric relations to what you're saying that can be a little source of humor. And if you can't, you could get a student or a partner or someone to help you with the graphics.
Yeah, we were talking at lunch about this, and certainly one of the great places to be able to bring these things in, and there's no set formula for it, but if there is an analogy or a metaphor or something that wants to emerge from this, and when you look at it, it says, oh, wow, that really perfectly crystallizes a point or illuminates it in some way, that's great. Those things, they can sometimes not work. And really, you do also have to have a sense of when to let go of these things, that sometimes it's just not going to work, or maybe it's like, you get to mention it once, and then walk away. Don't keep bringing it back. It's not going to work over and over again. Try something.
On the subject of process, when I started doing this, something that was an absolute shock to me and a stunning revelation is that there are actually books on this that you can read. And they contain information about how to be funny. And it's weird, there is a dichotomy, like Brian said. A lot of it's innate, a lot of it's practice, but there's a shockingly small number of general principles that comedians know and use. And they range from very specific things like organize your jokes in threes. And it sounds silly when you say in a science context, and you get on stage or use it in your writing, and you notice John's scientific un-American, well, it was a pattern of three. So things like this show up, and there's a big body of knowledge on this that fits in a book about this big, which is called Truth and Comedy. And if you want to, go read this book, Truth and Comedy, which is wonderful. I gave away all the secrets. But it is, as a scientist who went to it, it was this remarkable revelation that there is sort of some systemic knowledge about it that you can ingest. And of course, that's not enough, but that is a starting point.
Here's one of the other things that, you see great stand-ups who have wonderful, wonderful long sets that they will often use it's the callback, where there will be a particular joke that they make, say, relatively early on things, and at some point later on, when you maybe wouldn't expect it, it comes back around again. And it's
extra funny. Sometimes, and sometimes repeatedly, and there is a point, like, it can get funnier and funnier, and then at a certain point it drops off, and it's okay, no longer funny, and you used it too many times.
Of course, if you're Gilbert Gottfried, you will keep on doing it another 10 times, and it starts to get funny again.
Hi. So, as someone who works in a lot of different mediums, are there certain like jokes that work in print and jokes that work on stage and a podcast? Or do you have guidelines of what you think about, or any kind of general ideas?
I mean that's certainly true. There's some jokes that are kind of maybe have an oral part
sometimes.
Sometimes I think you have to. Yeah, you go ahead.
If something, if nothing else, sometimes the phrasing of certain kinds of jokes, things work better. You can say them aloud one way, and in print they would look odd, or the other way around. Sometimes just the way that people process the words is a little different. So, that's tough, but I don't know that there's a specific.
I don't know about thoughts about that. But you know what I want to come back to the one thing you brought up, analogies, and that's my favorite tool to recommend for a couple reasons. And that one is that the best tools for humor, some of them are also just the best tools for good, clear communication. And the analogy is perfect. The analogy can be a very great comedic device, but it's just a great device for explaining. And today in the keynote this morning, our keynote speaker she said something about this area where the apes hang out. She said it's sort of like a singles bar for chimps or for apes. And she didn't go on. We were discussing this. She just left it at that. And it's kind of humorous to think of it, but it made it clear. Oh, okay, you know what it is. And sometimes it just takes that. For comedic purposes, I might take one and run with it a little further. I like making fun of those, at a lot of airports, the only place you can smoke is in one of those glassed-in rooms. And I say it's like a terrarium in which you can view the smokers in a recreation of their natural habitat. And then I go on with that metaphor and run with it, and I have you see smokers, basking on rocks, or some of them are pacing. Parents are bringing their kids up to read the little plaque describing the species, Homo emphasemus, an endangered species, and that male smoker's mounting that female smoker, stuff like that. So not necessarily always going to be appropriate in your venues. I have a little more leeway, but. Sometimes what happens there is when I saw that room and the people smoking in there, it just struck me as funny. But I couldn't just go, ha-ha, isn't that funny? Until it crystallized as, it looks like a terrarium. Suddenly, once I had that metaphor, once I had that analogy, the humor and the relationship became clear, and other possibilities came off it. Yeah. Now, on the flip side, the risk is, sometimes scientists are going to get picky about whether your analogy is accurate enough. And in trying to, I discussed this with a communicator from an institute that has to do with quantum physics. And it's kind of hard to come up, but at some point, if you can't expect your entire audience to know calculus, then you're going to have to use the English language to convey something, to get something across. So sometimes you do have to go with a metaphor that's not 100% accurate, but good enough to communicate something to the public.
Yeah, I think there's something we were talking about, the opportunities for humor and places to look for it. And I think this particular joke or technique is one that would work probably better in things like video more than it would in print. But one of the things when you are trying to communicate about some science that is you recognize that it's going to be kind of a challenge for your audience, that it is, it may be taxing them, their concentration, their ability to follow what's going on. Something that, in Scientific American we would try to make do, and we would try to impress sometimes on the authors that it was okay to do this, was to put in something in which we would acknowledge this is going to be hard. Sometimes just a sort of reassuring thing of a line to the effect of saying, this will be somewhat complicated, but just flagging for your audience in some cases that we know this is going to be kind of a challenge, but we're not, if you get confused, you're not feeling stupid about this. But that's sort of like, you can set up a kind of visual joke with that sort of thing of people, your explanation, and cutting away to a shot of your audience staring, just slack-jawed and just in complete lack of comprehension, and then that gives you a chance to be able to jump back and say, well, okay, let's try this again a little more gently. And it's a way of being able to, the joke is a perfectly organic way for you to be able to recycle through your explanation or a certain point a couple of times in the interest of helping them understand this. And sometimes that will work and sometimes it won't, but there's an opportunity for the humor that really works to the point you want to make go the larger way too.
My name is Rebecca Gennard, and I'm very new to blogging. My blog is called Perils, and I'm formerly a chemistry professor, and I am making my way into science writing through this blog, and it's number 3. Like, I really want to. And I think chemistry, in particular, of the sciences, is one of those that people say, "Oh, God, I've never done chemistry." So I was like, why can't you laugh while you're learning it? So that's the intention of my blog. But I have 2 concerns about it. One is that people will think I'm just an idiot, that they won't realize that I'm making fun of myself. They won't realize that it sounds deprecating. To the extent that I don't even put my picture up there for fear that being blonde. Well, yeah, she's definitely just as stupid. Like, she doesn't know what she's doing. And my other concern is being worth, finding an audience. How many people are really go, well, today, what I really need is I need to learn some chemistry, and I need to laugh while I'm doing it. Those are my 2 concerns. So, I don't know.
There's a huge community of chemistry bloggers. Just get a couple of them to link to you and tap into their audience.
Yeah, and I do. And I think they're fantastic. Yeah, they won't be up with that. But this is so far. It wasn't so fresh at it. Why it goes so way.
Yeah, I think a certain amount of, in terms of getting the audience you want, that doesn't just take a while. You're building that up over time. But I think you're doing those kinds of things. And it's very tough. Something when it comes to the humor, it's sort of the style of the execution of what you want to do. That's your voice. That's part of what makes you what you are. And in some ways, when your choice about that, you sometimes when you're looking at this, you want to think about, so how much beyond that am I? It goes back to that issue of sometimes I'm just going to make jokes about chemistry. That would be delivering one thing, and it could be a really worthwhile thing. By saying it that way isn't a judgment on that, but that's clearly not just what you're pointing to. You want to do something deeper than that, and that's where it goes to finding really interesting topics and being able to show off how well your good funny brain wraps itself around those things and pulls the humor out of those situations and the explanations for it.
Yeah, you go.
Just on the chemistry blog thing, because I've had some experience trying to explain, not chemistry, it's chemistry, but some complex topics to some people. Like just the other day, I was having a discussion with a friend who doesn't know anything about quantum physics. So she said, "Can you explain it to me?" So I tried to explain it to her, and it wasn't working. And then I tried to explain to her about Schrodinger's cat. And I said, "This would be perfect to understand." She didn't get it. So I said, "The cat is both alive and dead." She's like, "So it's a zombie." I said, "No, it's not a zombie." And she's like, "But it's alive and dead, so it's a zombie." And I said, that's actually a pretty good explanation of sort of the theory behind Schrodinger's cat. So I sort of start talking to her about it, and I find out you can't be afraid to look stupid if you're trying to explain something rather complicated, because who cares if someone thinks you're stupid? If they're learning without realizing it, you know what? That's just gold.
You know, coming back to what Ben mentioned about techniques, when I had to do a couple of events for the American Chemical Society, one of the things I did to prepare was I looked up online a glossary of chemistry terms. And chemistry terms are filled with pun potential. Some may, have opinions as to whether that qualifies as comedy, but hush. But, I mean, pressure, reactions, bonds, there's tons of potential there. And one thing you can do, like something like that, another brainstorming technique, is to, whatever topic you want to write on, is to make lists of every term, nouns, adjectives on a subject, and put them all down in front of you and try to, this is where it gets to be good luck with this part, is see if you can find connections there. But it's very helpful, though, just the process of getting it all on paper, not just sort of reading it, but writing the list. All these related nouns. I tried to do this with trying to come up with a tough subject. Climate change, global warming. It's not a subject that the jokes ever really just jumped out at me. And so I still need to apply this, where just make a list of everything. Hot, rising ocean levels, deodorant. Start trying to think, take it to some other level. Not all the most obvious stuff, but also just like adjectives, migration, just terms, and then get it all on paper and then see if you can start to find interesting connections between them. That's the part where the art and science of it is a little harder to be helpful with.
Hi, I'm Chris. I'm dipping a toe into science comedy tomorrow night at the banquet, which I'm sure is why I'm asking this question. But I'd actually like to know what happens to you, Brian, when it's totally bombing. You're stunned. Nothing is working at all. How do you do that?
So I can't speak from personal experience, but from what I've heard. Yeah, it's a pretty miserable experience, because especially, here's one thing that's helpful. And it's so hard to actually learn and incorporate this. If you ask if you're asking, and I'm just sort of saying non-verbally, if you're asking if something's funny, if you're going, da-da-da, hey, isn't this funny? And so if your posture and your tone and everything, if you're asking if it's funny, it's very likely you're going to get back, no, it's not funny. So what you want to do is you have to know it's funny. You have to believe it's funny. And you have to believe it's funny. Like that. Is that better than know it's funny? And then you just have to present it and know it's funny and not care what the response is. And, for me, sometimes it's sometimes when you're trying out something new, you might sandwich it between more solid things, where it's like, okay, I'm going to take a chance on this one. It doesn't matter if it doesn't work, because I know the next one is going to. To say you can't care about it, and to say just do it that way, easier said than done. But it's helpful, just like, in all your writing, probably. Confidence carries you so far. Confidence and momentum. Just keep going, I mean, timing's important. You do have to kind of pause and allow for laughter. But just don't be asking if it's funny. Just tell them what you have to tell them. Know it's funny. If they don't laugh, it's okay, and move on to the next thing.
Okay, I have a question. I'm Sarah Chow at SSW Chow. How do you deal with hecklers?
I was just thinking in this previous session about the kind of comments that female bloggers in particular get. I was thinking it's one thing I've never been able to implement is we've never had moderation. Where before someone could heckle, it's I'm not going to approve your fucking heckle. Unfortunately, we don't have that. I mean, we kind of do, because you cannot take some shit from audiences. But sometimes they just blurt stuff out. You know what? I have to say that the better I got as a comedian, the less it happened. And it was sort of the same topic. When you're commanding the stage, you're less likely to get interrupted. You're still, especially at comedy clubs more often than conferences, you might have to deal with just drunk assholes. But I don't think you'll face that as much, although you might online. But I think that that's again, confidence and momentum carries you through a lot of it. And then the other part is, I started out having early on I had some cheesy comeback lines. Sometimes comics rely on kind of hackneyed old lines. I never wanted to do that, so I had a couple of my own, but they were kind of cheesy. And ultimately I was like, I don't need that. I should be able to get the better of this person in my element. So if somebody messes with me, I do have to end up with the upper hand. So I don't know what to say about the science of that, except that I just make sure that I put them in their place and try to shut them off. It's kind of tough. It has to be in proportion, because sometimes somebody said that sometimes they mean well. They're not really being an asshole. They're blurting something out. They're having fun and stuff. And if you come down too hard on them, you lose the audience. But very often the audience is with you because they're interrupting the show or something. So, yeah.
This is Ben again. One thing I wanted to say about audience, going back to this and this latest question, is that if you're worried about an audience, the single hardest audience to reach by miles is an audience that came to see comedy. And it's just, if you have the expectation of funny, then you're going to be harder. And for most of what we're talking about here, which is inserting humor into pieces that are largely science, and even at the banquet tomorrow night, which is not really a comedy thing, the audiences that come to you are so much more relaxed about it, and they're just happy to have some kind of humor, and it's much more relaxed. And a lot of these worries that people go into it with, like how am I going to deal with hecklers, how am I going to deal if I bomb, just don't really show up in most contexts if you're not trying to be a professional comedian. So I would say a lot of those worries really aren't for any of the kind of humor most people are trying to do.
Yeah, and I think it goes back into that point. It's, sometimes when the subject of science humor comes up, the natural question, it came up at lunch, it comes up anytime these things come up, what are your favorite science jokes? But the joke is the most artificial, tough, forced thing. It's why being a stand-up comedian is so brutally hard, because we're supposed to be trying to make something funny in the absence of any real context. Any context you have to suddenly invent in that moment. What makes a lot of other humor really successful, and is when, since their guard is down, it comes out of the situation. It's something that's, and we all know this, it's some of the funniest things we ever see or hear people do are not particularly jokes. In some cases, you can't even tell other people why it was so funny. It's just when that person, when she did that thing in that place, that was hysterical. And that's where that comes out. And it sort of goes to why you don't want to try too hard. If you look like you're trying to get that laugh too desperately, like you need it too much, then it does brand you as a loser, and you start to cycle down fast.
Comedians universally, I think, dread being asked by a person on an airplane what they do for a living. And I've had a situation where I was engaged in a conversation with someone, making them laugh for 15 minutes, then they ask me what I do, I'm a comedian, they go, tell me a joke. I was like, now you want to
make me laugh, funny man. Make me laugh.
I think I'd already made them laugh, and now they want a joke. And you're not going to laugh at the joke. Now I have to pick a joke that's going to work out of context. So the context is very helpful. And, John mentioned callbacks. A technique that I'll bet some of you have fallen into this naturally, and it's a very good technique for using humor, and I've done it, also fell into it naturally, like it wasn't really planned, is that, like I've done some short, it could be a short article, in this case radio pieces, where I basically opened with a joke that allowed me to segue into the topic. Then I might have discussed the topic rather dryly or maybe colorfully, and then at the end, a little bit of a callback to that joke at the beginning. It's a classic, easy structure, and you see it used in every content. You see this, callbacks are used in movies. Sometimes, very often, something happens at the beginning of a movie, and you know that's going to come up later. And it might be part of the plot, or it might be just that cute thing at the end that, ha-ha, we laugh, lights out.
And it goes right to that sort of that note of closure in some ways, because it creates expectations. There are no hard and fast rules, but to a certain extent, if you start with a joke, you better have a joke at the end.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's like, why did he stop being funny?
Yeah.
You're waiting for something to come back again. Choose that.
John, watching you run is funny. Honestly, run so more.
Python-esque.
Who would organize get people at completely opposite ends of the room?
Could we get a question over here for John?
Who doesn't laugh at shit. Is there a?
You want names?
This guy right here has not.
You know, the one thing I'd say, like, I get asked this a lot.
Dutch.
I have a routine about do scientists have a sense of humor? And the one thing, and I think that scientists, I might say this at lunch on Saturday, but I think it's an unfair character, because I think scientists have maintained their childlike wonder with the universe more than most other, and how come people don't ask, do accountants and lawyers have a sense of humor? I think scientists do, but you know, so I'll qualify this. Sometimes some scientists or science-minded people are very literal. And so sometimes something I say, if it's not literally accurate, so this one time I was talking about the heat in Arizona, I have this routine where I say it was 125 in Lake Havasu, and I go, that just sounds like science fiction. You're talking about the surface of Venus. And from the back of the room, someone went, no! Venus is much hotter than that. And this has become a routine, but it's exactly how it happened. I go, you know what? I was using a comedic device called exaggeration, and I should be able to use that. But that's the kind of literal, but I'm like that too, and I think it's the same reason I find wordplay. Because I'm so literal-minded, I love playing with it, and I love puns and wordplay. So sometimes it's that. It's like they're like hanging on the literal part and not going with the humorous exaggeration.
I'm going to hog the mic for 1 second and tell this young man in the front that zombies are in fact undead. So, a little bit of
That's
science.
a whole other. Maybe Schrodinger's cat was undead.
I'm Herman Fox. I'm a news writer. I was just wondering how much.
I wondered where the news came from. I thought that shit really happened.
Well, sometimes. Actually, that's what I was going to ask you about. Is how much do you draw from current events, and at what point would you censor yourself and not use things because of personal tragedy or like the ship capsizing? Obviously, there's a ton of jokes you could make, but is it appropriate and or how and what would be the venues where you would use current events in humor to tell science concepts and
there's a classic equation that's comedy equals tragedy plus time. It's something that's not funny right now. Nothing was funny after 9/11. But at a certain, and for a long time, that was the toughest. That was a really weird period for comedians, and especially because some people were like, "You can't discuss this topic at all." And what about a comedian who is a political commentator, as a political satirist? His job is to talk about the important stuff in the world, and you're going to tell him not to talk about the biggest thing that happened in this country. It's a tough topic. But there's inappropriate. There's ways when I discussed 9/11, and this wasn't science humor. The two subjects that I heard a lot of horrific, off-color, racist jokes. I never made jokes like that. What I explored was the media coverage, which I thought that made it into just like I just had some stuff to say about the media coverage, which was almost like porn. And my fear of flying right after I flew as soon as they let planes fly again, and my experience flying right after that terrorism. So I was exploring something I thought was really valid. I wasn't mocking anything. I was coming from my personal point of view. But that is tough. But I don't go after. I've never been a very mean comic. So, it's funny when you first said topical stuff, I didn't immediately think tragedy. But comics are very selfish in that I did have a John Denver joke, and when he died, you're just like, well, I fucked up that joke. Thanks, John. Now I can't do that joke for a while. Not caring much about how his family felt about it, just about how that one joke was going to work.
Doug Main is my name. I have a question and then a comment. The question is, how often do you think about what makes something funny when you're doing? I mean, just in general, when you're doing
The comedy theory stuff. It's interesting because I don't think I know any professional comedians that have really studied humor theory. They do it. It's a very intuitive thing. Have you ever given thought, like you're very funny, John, but have you given thought to why or how it's funny?
I don't, I mean, not really. I don't have any deep underlying, theory of here's why it's funny to me.
Yeah, you just sort of process something and it comes out that way.
It just seems funny.
I know that's a tough one, but I know there's a lot, and I don't think there's a definitive answer on it. I think there's obviously theories, but did you have some?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention something really quick. So actually, I was in this guy's class, and I was going to write the story about like the science of humor, and so I interviewed this guy, this researcher Peter McGraw. He has this theory called the benign violation theory. Anyway, long story short, this other writer had like totally beat me to it, and it was like the cover story of Wired in April. Anyway, so this theory is pretty interesting, though. I think it helps explain why some things are funny. The idea is things are funny because they're a benign violation of the way a person thinks the world ought to be, but they realize that violation is benign. And I think that helps explain some of these things, like why certain people can get away with things. Like Sarah Silverman can say something that, like, coming out of someone else's mouth would be like a hate crime, but you perceive her to be like, no, she's benign, she's, and like also, I think this relates to some of the other stuff, like why is it funny? Now I'm forgetting what someone else mentioned, but determining like whether or not to be like if something's too personal or too mean. I mean, you have to like strike the right balance in order to be right. I don't know. I just want to say.
Then it's no longer benign.
Yeah.
I think, as I was saying, it's like to you earlier, is that it's kind of hard to imagine that this all-encompassing theory that can cover why slapstick comedy is funny and why wordplay is funny. They seem very different, except surprise is essential. And in fact, to that end, one other thing about comedy writing is that the last thing you say, like to keep the surprise or the twist to the very end and not have stuff that follows it is most useful. So it's going along according to expectation, and all of a sudden the last word is the word that made it a joke and made it a surprise. I can't back that up with a solid example.
Jonathan Eisen at Phylogenomics. I just want to encourage everyone here to add more humor to their science papers themselves. There are some amazing examples of this, even if you do it secretly. So I was talking to Chris, who used to edit our genome sequence papers, and we used to hide little images and words and other things inside the figures. They caught us most of the time, but not all of the time. But I think it just adds a little bit of flavor, because I think there is a reason that people think scientists don't have a sense of humor some of the time.
Because they've heard some of their jokes.
Because the editors, exactly, sub-editors, beat it out of us. Anyway, I just want to encourage people to add more humor somewhere into their science papers.
We should probably start to wrap up.
Okay,
it's quitting time.
I want to give that little Douglas Adams example. I got a great, so this ties a couple things together. Your category about, here's another thing about the humor. Like special effects in a movie, it should support the narrative, and it shouldn't be there just for its own sake and calling too much attention. It's best if it can emerge from and support the narrative and be tied to it. Last year, at this conference, Christy Wilcott, Nerdy Christy, recommended a book by Douglas Adams, famous for The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. He wrote a nonfiction book called Last Chance to See, and it's about his adventures traveling to some exotic places, Madagascar and New Zealand, and with a biologist to see some creatures that are very rare and nearly extinct. And the whole book, it's good science writing, but it also is very entertaining and very funny. And here's an example of a great analogy that he uses when he's talking about invasive species. He says, it would be like introducing Al Capone, Genghis Khan, and Rupert Murdoch into the Isle of Wight. The locals wouldn't stand a chance. So, I mean, it's just really perfect in there. It didn't have to elicit a laugh. It's also geared more towards an English crowd than an American, but just a little bit. But the idea was, it fit in there very perfectly, and helped explain something about why invasive species are so dangerous to the indigenous ones.
And on that wonderful note, yeah, I think so. Just thanks very much for a good conversation on the subject of the humor and whatnot.
We're happy to carry on the conversation beyond this, right?
And why? Who is this gentleman making his way to the stage?